So in our first, or in our discussion group number 1, we had a topic, creation of demand for culture, creative partnerships for schools and museums. I think that we had a very cozy discussion group. We did a quick survey and we discovered that we had representatives from museums, educational sector, cultural sector. I think one person who raised a hand, and as I asked whether we have artists in the room, and there were quite a number, I think 1/3 of the audience who define themselves as policymakers because they represent the Ministry of Culture or the Ministry of Education. Our 3 presenters were very inspiring, I think, for the diverse audience. So we had Ida Brandholt Lundgaard from Denmark, and she shared her insights from the program they implement in Denmark with museums. We had Milda Laužikaitė from Lithuania, and Milda presented a creative partnerships project in Lithuania, and Sibylle Linke from Germany presented a very interesting program on cultural agents working with schools. The titles of the presentations were, as you can see in the slide, and all 3 presenters shared general information on the projects and programs that they represent, and the linking aspect of the 3 presentations was educational programs through cultural and creative agents who come into schools and bring in, I hope, a slightly different culture and slightly different perspectives into the learning and teaching processes in schools. And this actually is something that a spectrum of countries are practicing in long-term projects. So we all, I think, found out that long-term projects that last for 3-5 years have much more impact on the processes in educational institutions than a short-term project. So I took a liberty to use the slides from presenters' PowerPoint presentations because I had a very little time to prepare. So I picked up the slides that I think summarize what they were talking about, and as this conference, I understand, is focusing on sustainability and impact in general. So here's a slide from Ida's presentation, and through her talk, I think she touched upon very interesting aspects that relate to institutions, to society at large, and also in general to educational and cultural sectors that work together through institutions such as museums that are learning spaces and in modern context probably also are going through certain changes and trying to look at what their audiences need and how they build on the needs to attract new audiences and actually attract also long-established audiences to the work that they've been doing. So I'm not very sure whether you can read the slide from afar, but in terms of institutions, all institutions, I guess, museums and schools and any other institution that works in culture or in education need to develop as a learning organization, first of all, and also it means investment into staff, and not only into staff knowledge, but also into staff understanding how they can contribute to the benefits of the programs that they involved in. In terms of society at large, We are in the age when everybody understands that knowledge and information are not the only sectors or the only mediums that we want to invest in. Competences are probably the key word that now educational systems and educational institutions need to look at and invest in. And again, the cooperation partnerships of cultural and educational institutions can give many more solutions to providing the competences to young learners when they work together. In all three, I would say, projects, but cultural agents and creative partnerships are the two projects that work, I think, on a very similar concept. Mentioned that the impact is huge, and here I'm sharing Milda's slide. The impact is on all three target audiences, I would say: pupils, teachers, and schools as an institution. And here is something that I think in the morning was explained very clearly. It's something that counts, but it's not very easy to count. So all three item points, if I may say so, on the slide actually go through change, and pupils and teachers experience this emotional change that, as Milda mentioned, is not that easily taken up by people and by institutions especially, because this is something that is very private and very inner, that is difficult to grasp, difficult to count, but probably makes the largest impact on the whole development of institutions and of, I would say, communities even. And Sibyl, in her presentation, had a very useful slide, I thought, on sustainable targets, and probably this slide would sum up our discussions in our discussion group. That, first of all, no matter what kind of projects educational institutions are involved in, it's very difficult to persist that they should look into sustainability, because projects are usually planned for a certain time. But still, in long-term projects, educational institutions, they develop kind of a cultural profile, but also they should understand that after a project, this profile is very useful for them, and partnerships between schools and cultural institutions become kind of everyday life, natural, and hopefully after the project or program is complete, schools cannot live without it, because they've gone through a change, and this culture agency in schools share experiences that are not easily forgotten, because they are not records, they are those emotional changes that we talked about. Of course, lucky are countries like Denmark or Germany that have, I hope, more sustainable funding for projects like that, and schools can apply for specific funds and organize cultural projects after those formal partnership projects are complete. And I guess this is a message to policymakers that sustainable funding is one of very important factors to continue the work and to make sure that all the impact that funded projects have in schools could have that longer-lived impact, if I may say so.
To speak about creative industries with this very spectacular language we are used to is something very inspiring. So when I was asked to moderate the panel of libraries and culture houses. I say, but this language is still so traditional. Is somebody coming if we keep this way? And I was so surprised because more than 20 people came to discuss this area, this topic, and also all three presentations proved out very relevant and very accurate. So we started with Kęstutis Juškevičius. He presented a contribution with the title Libraries for Innovation, New Role of Libraries in Digital Age as Model for Emulation and Continuation in 2014-2020. And I must say that he's coming from Lithuania. This is a very big, important Lithuanian project in the field of libraries. This is a story about reinvention of libraries in Lithuania. So really something that gives a lot of positive thoughts about the future of these old-fashioned libraries, but still very modern organizations, as we saw. And he tried to show us through three campaigns this transformational role of libraries in Lithuania. One has a title E-Senior campaign, inviting people to come to the library for live internet broadcasted lecture on how to find information about health, savings and entertainment online. Then the next campaign, Internet for Your Garden, campaign inviting people to come to the library and watch live internet broadcasted lectures about gardening and other upcoming seasonal activities. And the third one was First Time Online, Let's Do It, campaign inviting people to come to public libraries and try to use internet for the very first time. Mostly on the basis of comparison of numbers between years 2008-2011, it is estimated that librarians in Lithuania became much more proactive promoters. Librarians became much more proactive trainers, and number of residents who participated in IT training has grown really rapidly. Huge numbers were introduced to us. E-services used in rural areas reached the level of urban areas, and library image in society has significantly improved. So this was really a story how to transform some traditional old-fashioned library to a vivid organization, institution of 21st century. Our second speaker was Kristine Pavelca from Latvia. But what she tried to do was to show, to offer evidence how about the economic value of libraries. And her article, her presentation has titled The Boundaries of Public Library Services Redefined, Evidence of Social and Economic Potential in Latvia. Very relevant title itself, very promising and good to communicate it with when you speak with ministers. It is understood that this is mainly the report on the larger study on economic value and impact of public libraries in Latvia that you can all find on internet. Again, many descriptive data on public libraries in Latvia are provided. An interesting piece of information is the drastic fall in the number of non-users. So the study estimates the economic impact of public libraries in Latvia using a very sophisticated methodology, contingent valuation method, and give a very solid proof of willingness to pay for libraries in Latvia. But then when the study, this article tries to show the economic impact of libraries, then it is a little weaker because when we speak about economic impact, then we come to the issues such as new employment, revenues, income, value added, these more tough, hard categories. But nevertheless, this study really is a good starting point to work in the next stages on economic potentials of libraries. In the final presentation, Peter Inke from Hungary was presenting a contribution with the title Culture Houses, the Cinderella in European Culture Policies. In his article, he presents the phenomenon of culture houses as institutions present in almost any European country, but somehow hidden because they are still searching for their modern identity. Especially in Eastern Europe, all these culture houses are a legacy of, and I must say positive legacy, of previous socialistic time, but yet almost completely neglected in discussions of culture policy on national, but also and mainly on international level. He shows that more than 1/3 of all resources, for example in Poland, go to such institutions, and that this subsector is the largest subsector of local financing of culture, followed by the libraries. He extensively presents an example of Poland with a comparison of data on financing of different cultural institutions in this country. In the second part of his presentation, he presented also different aspects of culture houses, such as culture houses as institutions, so public institutions, part of public infrastructure. Then their activities and functions, the employees, the governance, the challenges and risks, rationale and responsibilities. He opened really so many interesting questions that haven't been already tackled enough, that he offered with his contribution a lot of ideas for future research and future work. In general, the session opens up two main questions: valuation of impacts of libraries and cultural phenomena in general, and culture houses as neglected aspect of cultural policy on national and international level. On the first question, we can resume that both related presentations present very interesting descriptive analysis of data, but would need also statistical perspective to be able to answer to the question of economic impact in more convincing sense. So new employment, revenues, added value, all these economic categories. To the second question, the article of Peter Inke, or the presentation of Peter Inke, opens up an interesting aspect in culture policy, but the topic remains really open, and the question is only pointed to and not yet resolved. So I think, and I hope, that once we really, perhaps we have a conference only tackling and discussing the phenomenon of culture houses, because this phenomenon has so many different faces everywhere in Europe, and we really should enter into more elaborated and we have to raise awareness about the existing of this so very important component of local cultural life. Thank you.
Our parallel session was attended by around 35 people, those who were registered immediately on registering to the main session. We have quite a nice short time to discuss, but we did have a really exclusive presentations. The men came from Italy, indeed, the country which possesses in Europe the biggest extent of the properties of cultural heritage. So it's not an accident. The first presentation, which was given by Emilia Schicitano from the Ministry of Culture and Heritage in Italy, Ministry of Culture and Activities, Ministry of Heritage and Activities, was focused on the museum's life and the challenges the Italian museums face. And it was basically talking about the experience of being too inertive and maybe close to the society, and very obviously needed to more open perception towards the visitor and the user. Mrs. Armenia told us about her private experience, how it was difficult to insist the curators of the museum, the managers of the museums, to become more open-minded and to really accept the need of hearing the visitor, hearing the customer who needs to recognize and to learn more about the heritage, about the properties. And that was not easy. And her conclusion was very open and very fair, which said that one of the curators in the Capodimonte Museum in Naples finally said that, yes, I am a snob. I recognize that. So curators, as an experts, always think that they understand the heritage best, but in fact, without the understanding and use of the community, it loses most of the effectivity and perspective. The second presentation was by Mr. Przemysław Niedźwiecki from Poland, from our neighbor country. He shortly introduced the main objects which were upgraded, historic objects and the new ones, which were built to develop cultural activities in the cities. And all those objects were evidencing about the very high and intensive work Poland did in marketing the culture and the cultural life in their cities. It's very important to stress that historic buildings were renovated, indeed restoration and then renovated, adapted to new uses, attracting the city's communities to new cultural life, creating the space for the new expression to get together and to show what they want to see in the future, but at the same time to use the properties which were standing for 100 years in their cities already. And that is very important to say that this experience evidences that maybe sometimes the cities doesn't care or not sufficiently notices the properties they possess and that needs to be revived and can having a second or next stage in their life also to bring something new to their communities in a social and economic sense. And that was evidenced also by the third presentation given by the Professor Luciano Cupelloni. And that was a case about the historic slaughterhouse built in 1891 that functioned until the 1975. And the huge complex, which was dedicatedly built to that rude function of slaughtering, now was converted, in the course of some 7 years, was converted into a multifunctional complex, adapted basically to the cultural needs of the Academy of Arts, of the university, of the initiative groups that deals with the modern or alternative economics and social cultural gatherings. And that complex evidences also about how the city centers can get and receive new capabilities and new even offer to the citizens by reviving the cultural properties and putting them to the right way of use and opening the new perspective not only for the buildings itself but also for the societies living around and societies and people living and visiting the cities. So shortly to say and to summarize all those three presentations, though the evidence is about the variety of the perception and access opportunities to the cultural heritage, it should be stressed that yes, cultural heritage remains the fundamental resource, both social and economic. Then the question open is how we properly treat and adapt it to make it workable for the contemporary needs. The question which was said in the morning session about how much or how little we should do to really make the best effect of the historic property remains open. These answers cannot be invented, universal answers. Each answer should be found on the particular spot, on the particular object. So the challenge is still in front of us. But looking back to all the presentations, we can really recognize that when either investing and taking into account the examples in Rome or in Poland, which we're presenting during the parallel session, we can really recognize that those are investments, not only subsidies, and quite substantial investments, talking in economic terms. That's why, talking about the heritage, we should at least start very carefully think about the need of collecting data, which was recognized in our first presentation, that museums in Italy doesn't much care about the collection of data about the visitors, about how efficiently museums are used, and what are the outcomes, social and economic in terms of the functioning of the museums. So, talking about the counting and accountability, we should recognize that the cultural sphere needs to invent, I mean, on the national level, maybe for the separate bigger objects, need to invent the indicators how to measure effectivity and consequences of the cultural life, consequences social and economic. So this is the question which remained open. We didn't have time, in fact, to get deeper into that. But this is what we still need to target and think about, talking about the heritage preservation, management and use. And to achieve that, we indeed should recognize that we permanently need to search for the innovative management methods. Because what we heard in the museum's presentation, in the cultural centers development in Poland, that innovative management is hopefully the most important tool to make the cultural life more visible, more understandable for the users, and making it better marketed, what is not sufficiently often done if talking about the cultural sphere. And indeed for that goal we need a strong political support. That is not always as strong as we heard yesterday about the cultural industries from Estonia, and then we had some presentation from Lithuania, which didn't inspire me at all, when seeing how two close little countries can differently access the question of cultural potentials from the political sphere. So indeed, and then having the political support, we need, as it was said by Vilma, sustainable financing. I don't believe that we can have it, because having no sustainable economic life, we cannot expect sustainable financing. But what we can achieve is sustainable social support. And that was evidenced in both of the presentations, three presentations we have had in our session. So what we need, and what was said in the presentation by Erminia Schicitano, was that we need to really more openly target the convention, Council of Europe's convention, framework convention of the heritage values to the society, which in fact talks basically about the social aspect, socialization of the cultural heritage affairs, cultural heritage management. So when talking about the conversion, use, adaptation and restoration, we should be more open-minded and not to close our vision on the technicalities and expert affairs, but openly start measure, understand and interpret heritage preservation with the eye of economist, with the eye of a social researcher, and also with the IT expert and marketing expert. So those are very general summarizing points. Thank you for your attention.
I'm very happy that the section that turned attention to digital shift in presenting digital content was quite heavily attended. We had a lot of participants, and although we had a lack of time, we tried to reserve some time for discussions. I think that in fact we had a very good team of speakers in connection to all those problems and opportunities that been discussed during this conference. So we had a view from private sector and also a view from public sector, and in the presentations, such issues like private-public collaboration, user engagement, user experience development were discussed. So I would briefly summarize what we were able to hear and discuss. The first presentation was by Jill Cousins, who represents Europeana, who is the executive director of Europeana Foundation. And she presented a speech on Europeana and the cultural heritage ecosystem. In her presentation, she focused on defining the niche for Europeana, and she considered Europeana as a large-scale open content depository that could be reused by industry, reused by different sectors as education, tourism, and many others. And interestingly, that Europeana currently pays more attention to defining its impact, to defining, well, I would say its influence and its role in economy. And Ms. Cousins presented some results where this impact could be seen, for instance, in content reuse. And, well, currently, Europeana seeks to engage those communities that could potentially reuse the content. So the main value is the large-scale open cultural heritage content that presents the European culture in its diversity. The second presenter, Paul Manwaring, represents already another sector, the sector, I would say, creative industries. He is a creative director of Glimworm, a multimedia design and development company, and he presented a lot of interesting insights into private and public collaborations between memory institutions and small and medium enterprises which are engaged in creative repackaging the content. So probably as was emphasized in the presentation, the issue is that we have vast digitized collections online, and what's next? And how to present this content in engaging and attractive ways. And here there is great potential for collaboration with creative industries. There are examples of successful projects such as Vistory, for instance, an application that enable user to combine views of particular historical monuments with digitized materials and many others. So probably this presentation could be seen as a direct suggestion for further collaboration. And finally, there was a presentation by James Davis, who represents again another part, I would say, of commercial sector, who represents Google Art and Google Cultural Institute as a bunch of initiatives related to providing attractive, engaging access to cultural content. And here we also can see this initiative as an example of collaboration between private and public sectors, because such initiatives as presenting heritage from museums, archives, libraries online, repackaging this content would be never available and possible at all without such cooperation. So Google's experience in cultural sphere is modeling user experience, providing realistic, engaging experience for users who explore the content online. Finally, we had some time for discussion. We reserved some time to discuss the topics, and I would divide those topics we discussed into strategic and operational. Starting from operational, there are still some issues we need to solve, and we need to collaborate to solve. First of all, these are copyright issues, because in order to present vast collection of digitized content, we need to create fully functioning system of cooperation with copyright holders, especially if we are speaking of mega initiatives, of cross-border initiatives. There are still issues in engaging member institutions themselves into wider collaboration, into networking and presenting their content online. Member institutions are not always willing to unlock their content and to transfer them into other systems and other initiatives. And again, still there are some challenges in reuse and repackaging the content by small and medium enterprises. There are a lot of talks on the topic, but still small and medium enterprises would like more support and more collaboration in reusing, repackaging cultural content in attractive ways. And finally, I would mention some strategic issues that emerged. And first of all, this was a question from the audiences about suitability, or how to say, attractiveness of large-scale systems of digitized content to the user. In fact, end user find large-scale heritage systems not very much motivating and even quite difficult to use. Therefore, another question emerges here. We have tools from commercial sector, we have content from cultural sector. Who will still achieve those big goals that were mentioned through the conference, like building social capital, cultural capital, and other objectives that are actually outside of commercial sector, but perhaps are related much more to memory institutions who still represent themselves as depositories, although digital depositories. So, to briefly summarize, we have still a lot of questions to think of. We should still solve some operational programs to make those systems function, but again, we should look into the future and see what are the goals behind those systems and applications. Thank you.
That's the question of this conference. And I think, especially in these parallel sessions, it became very clear that a huge treasure of experience and knowledge about the relevance of cultural activities for social and economic development is already available in Europe. So this evidence actually is the problem, and how can we actually make it known better? Some of it actually remains sort of hidden or dispersed due to sometimes sectoral or institutional approaches of dissemination, sometimes also because of linguistic or other impediments. I mentioned just confidentiality of data in some cases, or the inflexibility of, for example, statistical office to actually handle meaningfully disseminate this information. Which brings me to the question whether the actual evidence gathering, or even big data gathering mechanisms as such, or the already existing evidence itself, its meaning and its potential inspiration also to politics, should be our prime concern. I can tell you the story of a minister of research and technology in my country in the 1970s, who was well known for two things. On the one hand, for establishing the first huge science databases, and on the other hand, for basing his own political decisions almost exclusively on rumors. So maybe we have to live with such contradictions, and maybe we have to try to build more trust first among, for example, administrators, parliamentarians, so our voices are better heard and understood. In some, not in all cases, evidence of the firm anchoring of cultural activities in civil society may be of help, as we just heard, which, according to my own research experience, has greatly improved over the last decades. In other cases, the use of advanced culture-friendly marketing approaches could possibly deliver results. We also heard that. Yesterday, I quoted this Swedish rock group saying, if you don't have good songs, a business plan won't help. However, we could also turn this phrase around. If you do have good songs, a business plan may sometimes be helpful. And I think we have, in this conference, been able to see together and develop together important elements of such a business plan. I will show you from one of those presentations just now in the parallel sessions. That's this one here from Ida. I hope it can be shown here. Yeah, well, you can read it. From Ida Brandhorst Lundgaard from Denmark. And she sort of guides us in that way through the potential business plan we have to do. First of all, we have to recognize the complexity of the task. This has been done during the conference, and we should be proud about that. Second, and that's very important, we have to learn to work in partnerships, sincere and open partnerships, that is, both across sectors and across borders. I must say, as a personal experience, the success of our compendium of cultural policies and trends in Europe over the last 15 years wouldn't have been possible without that. And thirdly, we have to understand that this is and must be a dynamic, strategic and process-oriented task we have to achieve, which requires at least a medium-term perspective and both as regards time and resources. Also, as we have really seen in the conference, as regards coping with the communication needs of the digital age. And finally, of course, and that's the reward we could get, is more respect. Respect for the knowledge and experience that professionals in the arts heritage and contemporary media really deserve. So let me thank and congratulate the organizers of this conference, especially those from Lithuania, to invite so many knowledgeable experts from all over Europe and for letting all of us take part in the development of a truly European business plan for culture. Thank you.